I will note this image was created in Stable Diffusion, which is a generative AI product. I will come back to that story later, but what I was looking for when I asked Stable Diffusion to create something for me, I wanted to have something that represented a student and a faculty member sort of volleying the AI ball back and forth. So that's what it gave me, and I asked it for manga style. So we'll come back to that at some point. Again, thank you. I know other people just came in, but I lost. Do you want to introduce yourself? I know who you are. Thank you so much. What a crowded room. All right, so my plan is to talk for about maybe 15 minutes and invite my colleagues who are on this slide deck to also jump in when appropriate. But then also we really just want to talk to you, get a sense of how you react to what I put on the slide deck, as well as what questions you have and ideas about how to move forth, which is really, I think, the big question on this particular topic. So to begin, I just thought I'd put a generative AI definition on the screen. This comes from a book that I think is fairly helpful if you know absolutely nothing about this, called Talking About Generative AI. And it's a really basic definition. This is not a technical definition in any way. Gen AI works like this. A user provides the AI with a prompt, asking the AI to create a specific deliverable, an essay, a song, an image, the solution to a math problem, and so on. The AI then scrubs through all of the data available, looking for patterns and recurring information about the requested task. It then reorganizes that data into a pattern that it deems to answer the prompt. So I'm hoping that just gives us all a kind of really basic place to start wherever you are. I will note that for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to assume you know the following in one way or another. One, that a company called OpenAI, they've been in the news a lot in the last couple months, released ChatGPT 3.5 in November 2022. And since then, they've also released ChatGPT 4, which we'll come back into the conversation in a moment. There were similar products, maybe not as impressive, before November 2022, but this definitely seemed to be a turning point, certainly in the public's awareness of what was going on regarding AI. Since then, many more such products have emerged, hundreds and hundreds of these things. Some are better than others, and some of them are obviously very explicitly trying to compete with the OpenAI product, like Google's Bard. Some of these focus on generating written prose, but others generate code, images, videos, etc. And the rapid development of generative AI products raises big questions for you guys and for our students. Thus the reason there are so many people in the room, I assume, right? Is this is a big issue for all of us in terms of how we teach and what we teach. So what have we been up to? That's the first thing I wanted to do, just give a little review of what some folks on campus have been a part of. So to begin, we signed up to be part of something called Ithaca's SR Generative AI project. And this semester, Rachel Schnepper and I hosted a generative AI faculty ambassador program. Actually, it took place in this room, basically where I'm standing right now. We had 9 faculty from across the 3 divisions meet with us for 5 sessions over the course of the semester. We had our last one last week. And basically just tried to start at the beginning, like what are the basics, what's a chatbot, what's a large language model, et cetera. Had one day where we just played with different kinds of tools, talked for a couple days about assignments, and either assignments that try to be AI proof or assignments that try to exploit and use AI to teach students something. We invited a few students to talk at that session. And then we ended last week with talking about some ethical considerations. And in particular, I wanted to call this an ambassador program. I did not ask anyone for permission for that title, was because I really wanted to get faculty in the room from a wide variety of perspectives and experience with these kinds of tools, and then basically ask them to go forth and start to clue in their faculty colleagues about what they've been talking about. And in fact, I have to send out a form to them where they kind of commit to something that they're going to do next semester to sort of like spread the word about some of these conversations. Really, my goal, and I think Rachel's as well, was just to help everybody have a more nuanced conversation about AI, which I think has already started to happen nationally. There was like a big freak out in December 2022, probably through about May, people really, really freaking out. I think that, the temperature's gone down a little bit, but there's still a lot of questions about what to do. So that was the project that we worked on specifically this semester, but there's been other things as well. I run an assessment lab on campus that has 8 students in it. And I told them when they got to campus in September that I really wanted them to do some work on generative AI this semester. So they conducted interviews with other students. We did what I call a pop-up focus group, which basically they go up to students who are walking by at a major passage point on campus and say, hey, are you willing to talk to us for a few minutes about a given topic? Speaking to about 82 students. So obviously sometimes it'll be 2 or 3 students in a group that they then sort of chat about something. They record them, and then we transcribe the recordings using Otter AI, artificial intelligence tool. And right now we're in the process of sort of processing that data, but I am going to show a little bit in a few slides. So when they did those interviews, they asked students questions about sort of their sense of what generative AI was and how they were using the tools, how they were reacting to faculty policy, and also asking them to consider some scenarios that are sort of like on the gray area of something that may or may not be appropriate in the academic context for using AI. I have a handout, I don't know if I have enough for everybody, so feel free to share them, that has the different kind of questions we asked in different focus groups, as well as those scenarios on the back. So I'll give those to Glass, you can pass them around. One other thing they did was they went and pulled down the 131 syllabi that were in the syllabus library at Wesleyan for fall 2023 and just did a quick coding of them to see how often AI statements, policy statements, appeared in this semester. And I'll show you that data in a second. We also did a lot of reading. Tons of reading. And when I say we here, I again want to point back to Kevin, Andrew, and Rachel, because they're the people I know the most about what we were doing. I know these are my favorite people to read, in particular, Ethan Malik, who is an associate professor at the Wharton School at UPenn, who does some really, really interesting stuff. And I'm sure Andrew and Rachel have their own favorite people to read. And there's hundreds and thousands of articles to read at this point, but we just tried to stay up on top of things as much as we could. We did a ton of playing. I already told you the ambassador group played with tools. I just put some of the tools up there that we've played with, but I'm sure there are many more where that came from. Just trying to get a sense of what's happening with these tools, and to a point that I'll raise in a moment, how quickly they're evolving and changing just within a few months. And then finally, just talking. So I mentioned my colleagues in the room who I've talked the most with. I think probably between the 4 of us, I've had a meeting at least every week, if not every other week, talking about something related to AI. Every day. I mean, Rachel and I definitely, there was one day where Rachel was definitely on vacation, that Rachel, and yet we somehow still were on a Zoom call for 2 hours playing with Grammarly Go. So we've been talking and thinking about this a lot, and we've also tried to loop in as many other offices as we could think of, given whatever time we had. So Andrew and I met with the Gordon Career Center to get a sense of what they saw with their students this semester, as well as trying to get a sense of what's appearing in job postings right now. We've looped in Mary Alice Haddad and OFCD as much as possible. We've had someone from admissions sitting in on some of our groups, because imagine how this is hitting the admissions office in particular, academic advancement, the WSA, other places as well. So we've tried just to keep talking to everyone and see what's happening. That's why we're here to talk to you as well. Yes. All right, so I'm basically just gonna throw some observations out, and I'll tell my colleagues to feel free to tell me I got this wrong. But as I sat down a few days ago and said, all right, so as I think about the semester and what I've seen, what do I want to tell you guys about? So one is that faculty's reactions are all over the place, and not just people at Wesleyan, right? I'm talking more nationally. And I feel like there's a spectrum. It begins with the deeply suspicious, right? And that can be characterized in a bunch of different ways. The I'm too busy to deal with this, the not impressed group, the mildly curious, and I would say the overeager. I'm somewhere between. What did I miss, Rachel?
I was just going to ask if all of these were generated.
No. And so this is actually part of the story, which is I was going to do these actually on Adobe Firefly, which is sort of like Stable Diffusion, where you basically type in the thing you want and it creates the picture for you in whatever style that you want. And when I went, yes.
But deeply suspicious, it leaves space,
yep.
Right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. There's a lot going on with this dude. That's what I think, yeah. So, very fair. But when I was trying to make the images using Adobe Firefly, which I've been using for a good probably 6 months, I hit their first paywall. And all of a sudden, it had been in beta and you could play as much as you want. All of a sudden, it was like, you need to pay $4.99 a month now. And that's part of the story of what's happening with all of these tools. Yeah, the deeply suspicious is both the, there's just so much going on, I think in particular with these two. I'm actually going to pause on the unimpressed, because one thing I saw in the last year in particular was that there were folks who went to ChatGPT, which is the most famous of them all, right? They do a couple tight prompts. They might ask it to write a paper. They get the paper back and be like, not impressed. And my argument for you is if that's all you've done with ChatGPT, you need to return to it because it's a garbage in, garbage out situation. The more sophisticated the prompt you put in, the better the output that you will get. And it can do very interesting things if you're willing to play with it. And that's where things get very, very interesting. So I feel like the unimpressed group is a very interesting group and has, again, evolved over time. All right, still staying with the theme of faculty's reactions are all over the place. I told you my students looked at the syllabus library. And again, this is 130 syllabi. That's nowhere near representative enough of what's being taught at Wesleyan. But just to give you a sense of what they saw when they did this, by their count, 59% of those syllabi didn't say anything about AI. By the way, mine didn't either. So that's not a judgment at anyone's point. I mentioned it in class, but it was not in my syllabus. So we don't know what's going on with that 59%. 16% of the syllabi banned all AI. So it's like, don't use it in one way or another. 16% banned some of it. So said they'll have some sort of like, don't use it in this situation, but use it in this situation. 4% said, use it, I don't care. Sometimes those were followed by statements, use it, but it's not really gonna help you, that kind of statement. And by the way, our students have reported that some of you guys have said that in class too, which again, no judgments on any of this. Like we're all just trying to figure out how to deal with this. And then 5% of the syllabi actually had some sort of specific reference to an AI assignment. So there was going to be some way in which the students were specifically asked to use AI as part of something that they were doing. My argument, I say this about everything with higher ed, is that a range of reactions makes sense and is healthy. I expect to see that. I think that's probably good that students get a variety of viewpoints, especially at this point in time. But it also does raise the question, what does it feel like to be students in this environment where they have one class where a faculty member could be saying, use it for all of your assignments, and another saying, don't you dare touch it. I have one student, Andrea knows this student because I mentioned her maybe to you, who said she has not touched ChatGPT because she is absolutely terrified that someone's going to accuse her of cheating. So she just won't even go near it, even for personal playing, right? She just won't touch it. So you got like a really interesting, what is it like to be a student in this environment where you're hearing all these different things? And I would say, I propose, and maybe this is not a good parallel, imagine if this were, instead of saying don't use AI, it was don't Google. And like, what would that be like for students? For someone saying Google, someone saying don't Google, etc. All right, students are definitely using AI. This is observation number 2. Maybe not all of them. I just told you about one student who is not. All right, so observation 2, students are definitely using generative AI. Maybe not everybody. This is just from Inside Higher Ed on October 31st. Students outrunning faculty in AI use, according to the survey that they ran, 75%, the majority of students that identify as AI users, said if their instructor or institution banned generative AI writing tools, they would be at least somewhat likely to continue using the tools. Right? And I mean, part of the thing to think about here, and I think a bunch of us has said this, we're not going to legislate our way out of this one, right? You can put in these policies, but it's going to get increasingly difficult to do these kind of outright bans. So we can definitely talk about that when we move to discussion. What I saw in the interview data, and I haven't had the chance to process this data that my students collected very carefully yet. That's going to be my January project. But what I saw was these really interesting cases of students talking about how they use generative AI tools to basically bridge gaps. So this is the screen I really want to pause on. I want to say a couple things before I show you these quotes. One, remember, my students interviewed other students. This is the first year that I've not participated in these pop-up focus groups that my students do because I didn't feel like I could be there and get students to be honest about what they were doing with these tools. And just to give you another piece of this, when Andrew and I went and talked to the Gordon Career Center, we asked them, so have your students said anything about using ChatGPT, for instance, to write a cover letter? And basically their answer was no, they're not saying that to us, but they're sitting and working in our space and we see it open on their laptop. And so my joke has become that this is the new vaping. They're like secretly doing it, but they don't want to talk about it because they're very afraid of getting scolded for doing so. One more story to that regard before I continue to build the suspense about the quotes. In my class, when I brought it up at a certain point during the class, a particular student gasped. Oh, can we talk about that here? And I said, yeah. And he said, it's my friend, which is one that stayed with me quite a bit. So with that, all right, I'm going to do these one by one and I'm going to read them so we can all hear what they're saying. And again, what my students told the students they were interviewing was, please don't tell me your name. This is about as anonymous that we can make it for you. And this is what they said. So one student said, one of my friends uses it to help with code and create practice code. or try to figure out what's a problem in it. And then other friends use it to do practice problems that are for a math test or a chemistry class. So I think they use it in a lot of different ways. Different students. Sometimes if I don't understand a concept, I'll paste in what they wrote in the textbook, and then I'll be like, can you just put it in simpler terms or terms that an 8-year-old would understand? By the way, this is one of the first ways I used ChatGPT was tell it to me like I'm a 5th grader. It was very helpful for certain concepts. David Westmoreland, is he here today? He asked me to write a survey for Gaussian chemistry computational software, and given that I did not understand what Gaussian software was, I had ChatGPT basically write it with my prompting, and then I sent it to David Westmoreland, and he said, not bad. And the first part of the prompting was, could you explain what Gaussian software is to a 5th grader? Because I did not understand, right? And that's where it's so much better than Google. I've used ChatGPT to do some researching. I found that when I ask prompts questions, it can pull from various sources. I guess the only difficulty is I don't know which sources, but it allows me to do a lot of preliminary work for papers. This goes to that bridging gap piece. I recently started using ChatGPT this month for class because it's like having Yoda in your computer. You could just ask it a question, and then if it's not clear, you could just be like, elaborate, instead of going to Google and asking Google the same question and often having to go over and over until you find a page that's useful. It's helpful for coding because sometimes I get errors in coding and it won't make sense to you. I don't understand what all the errors mean, so I ask, can you explain what this error means to me? I just annotated this one page, this one passage. So this is a student who was working, and my students apparently came up to the student and started talking. So I literally just did this work. I just filled it with questions and stuff, but I could have just plugged it into ChatGPT and get it to explain the question so I can understand the reading. I am particularly interested in this kind of thing. One of the mantras I've had over the course of the last 6 months or so is, yes, ChatGPT is going to change the way we and our students write, but it is also, I think, drastically going to change how our students read. And some of these tools, you can just upload all the PDFs for all your research and get it to summarize, right? So what does that mean for reading? Observation, what are we on? 4. Generative AI, as I've already said, is evolving rapidly, but I really just wanted to highlight 2 examples. One being that shift from 3.5 to ChatGPT 4 to who has a ChatGPT 4 account? A couple of you guys do. Most of you do not. I have not gotten mine yet either. Is it fair to say it's drastically different than 3.5? Okay, because I haven't really used it too much, except through Rachel's account. Fair. So we juxtapose those, and I'm also going to juxtapose, and I told you, Rachel and I talked about this on our vacation day, Grammarly to Grammarly Go. If you were a faculty member who told your students it's okay to use Grammarly, you might want to revise that statement, right? Because this is a whole new ball of wax. I don't remember what Grammarly Go, it costs $14 a month, something like that.
It's got various tiers.
Yeah. Which all of these products are moving to these. They draw you in like Adobe Firefly did, and then they're like, now you have to pay, right? So my argument, I don't even think I have the date right for this, but if you played with these tools, say maybe back in June, remember they probably have changed, right? So especially if you're in that unimpressed category, you need to keep coming back and looking at these things again because they're changing so rapidly. And related to this issue of the tiers, that is no doubt going to create a group of haves and have-nots on our campus with our students, right? Who's going to pay, for instance, with ChatGPT, $20 a month to access it. And what is that going to mean? Because the tiered products, the ones you have to pay for, they tend to produce better output without relying on sophisticated prompting quite as much. They tend to work faster and more efficiently. I've been playing with Stable Diffusion since Elijah Hughes told us about it. And it does create some pretty pictures, but it takes a hell of a lot longer than Adobe Firefly did. So, right, you see some difference in how fast they are, how integrated they are into other work products you already use, and whether they do things like allow you to remove the watermark, right? Some people think you made it and nobody else did. So this is what's going to happen, right, when you have all these tiering. Yeah.